Hello and welcome to another Enhancement of Kermit. This of course is Kermit, the Land Rover. Kermit is a late 70s Series 3, slightly modified, completely rebuilt. As part of that rebuild I sorted out the steering, but now after a year and 7,000 plus miles I'm not happy with it. So we're going to upgrade that. I'm going to briefly go over why I'm not happy with it, and then we'll go over the different options of fitting power steering to a series Land Rover, and then I'll tell you which one I've chosen and we'll get stuck in. Now a lot of people do this conversion to improve the steering at low speed. I've got the opposite issue. I want to improve the steering at high speeds. I'll show you what's going on. So you should be able to see the steering wheel and the front wheel there at the same time. So if I move, I'm now moving the steering wheel. Front wheel is completely stationary. What that means is in practice that there's, trying to go in a straight line over about 40 miles an hour, there's a constant course correction, and it's not small either, it's going like that and like that. It's exhausting for long distances. Now this never bothered me with the old Land Rover because, well, mainly because it never went that speed, or not for very long anyway. 20 years I was driving that one, never had an issue, but obviously Kermit I intend to do much longer distances with. So movement of the steering wheel is then transmitted down this steering column to this steering box down here, where it goes from that kind of movement to that kind of movement. And it's the steering box itself is where most of the issue lies. This is what the steering box looks like if you pull it to bits, and on the one that's in Kermit I replaced all the wearing parts, rebuilt everything exactly as per the manual, except for this. This shaft here, you can't buy new anymore. And that's the reason this one's in bits, is because I pulled it apart to see if this shaft was any better than the one that's in Kermit, and it isn't. It's got exactly the same problem. There's chipping and other damage here, which is exactly where most of the steering takes place, in the centre position. So I rebuilt the steering boxes in Kermit, but I had to use the original shaft, which has got similar issues to this one. I shimmed it all up correctly, I adjusted it up, and it was much better than it had been, but you could feel that notchiness round about the centre point. With the vehicle up on axle stands, you could feel it. And I said at the time that I probably wouldn't be happy with that long term, and well, here we are. So you can't buy a new shaft to go in the steering box, but you can buy a new steering box. So that's what I did. In fact, I went one better than that, and I got hold of this, which is a military reconditioned box. So this was rebuilt by the army in, I've got dates down here, 79. And it would have been rebuilt with all new factory bits. So this is as close as you can get to a Land Rover factory brand new steering box. But before I went ahead and fitted it, I just thought, is it actually fit for purpose for what I want to do? And of course I decided no. Now, the whole point of Project Kermit was to build a Land Rover that's incorporated all the best bits of various Land Rovers from across the ages. And that's why I started with a Series 3, because that's my favourite. But I went with a Stage 1 grille, because I like the look of that. I went with the 200 TDI engine, because that's, in my mind, the best engine. I fitted disc brakes, because they're better than the drum brakes. But is this the best steering system? No, not by a long shot. And of course, if I'm going to strip it all down in order to fit this one, why not just upgrade it? I will use this one. I'll use this one when I get round to rebuilding the old Land Rover, so it won't go to waste. But I've got something a bit more tasty in mind for this. Now, I was still a little bit on the fence over doing this, but what finally pushed me into making the decision to go for it was reading an article in Nick's Land Rover blog. Now, for those of you who don't know, Nick is someone who has a Series 3 and he's done all the modifications, and he's got an amazing blog where he's just documented the entire lot. And it's an invaluable resource, not necessarily for step-by-step instructions on what to do, but for providing an example of somebody having done something. So this blog post was written just after he'd done the power steering conversion to his Land Rover, and the bit that caught my eye was that he reported that the steering was better than standard, even without the power assist. And I thought, that's what I need, is not necessarily the power of the power steering, but just an improved system. So having made the decision to fit power steering, there's three options of how to go about it. The first is electric assist. So you have something that sits in the dashboard and it just amplifies your movement. The second option is to fit a hydraulic ram down there, and again that amplifies what you're trying to do. Now either of those two options are just going to make the problems that I have even worse. So I'm going with option number 3, which is to replace the steering box with a power assisted one. And the one I'm going to use is from the Range Rover P38, the second generation Range Rover. So let's get the truck inside and I'll show you all the bits I've collected. Here's all the parts I've collected for this conversion. Most of it's from a Range Rover P38. Everything in this corner, including the actual steering box and this reservoir and some other stuff. Here I've got the steering column from a Defender, and here I've got the steering wheel from a MG Metro. And then this pair of taps which will help us make a new Draglink. That'll make sense when we get to it. There's a couple of other things we're going to need as well. Something to make the Draglink out of, and of course a pump for the hydraulic system. But those things I think I've got in stock somewhere. For now, I'm going to get on with stripping this down. I'll be out of everything now. The last bits of the strip down are the drag link that's underneath here, the steering relay that it's attached to, and this little arm here. Well, here's all the old components. A big bonus of doing this conversion is just reducing the amount of stuff in the system, because every joint in the steering system, that's a potential source of play, and you only need a tiny bit here and there and it soon adds up, and then you're just weaving all over the road. Anyway, I'm going to reposition the radiator back where it's supposed to be. So you can see now how it's going to work. We've got the steering column that comes down here, and then that will attach via that universal joint via this thing here, cut down into the steering box, and then that motion is translated into that motion down here, and that'll be pulling on a drag link which we've yet to make up because this one's too short. Simple. The difficult bit is going to make it all nice and proper. So I've been playing around with the exact positioning of the steering box, and this is where I want it to sit. So I've chopped up here by 5mm and I've chopped up here by 15mm, and that's relatively square now. I'll bring you in closer and we'll go through the plan. Now, a fair few other people have done this conversion, and there's lots of different ways of attaching the steering box to the chassis. I have seen people use like a 1/2 inch thick plate welded onto the chassis, and then this simply bolts onto that. I've seen thinner plates with gussets on them, and again it bolts onto the plate. What I'm going to do is slightly different to that. I'm going to have a plate on the front which will weld onto the chassis, and then I'm going to have a bracket down here and a bracket down here, and some crush tubes in between the plate and the brackets, and bolt it all together like that. That'll make more sense when I actually do it. This piece of steel here will provide both the plate and the brackets. It's a piece of 7-inch channel. See how wide we want it. Good. Yeah. Now I need to work out how to do the brackets here. Thinking put that in. I think what I really need is a temporary fixing. A spiral tap in there. Very useful for this sort of thing. So we're sat on 2 points now. We're sat up against here, and we've got that screw in there. The chassis curves, so it's very hard to find a reference point to make things square. But yeah, here we go. So there's one. So if we think about what's going on, I think this final design is going to work really nicely. So the steering box is going to try and twist everything this way and this way. And having this set up is going to resist that really well. So this 6mm plate will be welded on here, here, underneath and inside here. And then this is a 10mm section. That's going to be welded on in 2 places. And that's going to have a twin underneath. Then we're going to have crush tubes here, here and underneath again, and they'll be welded to the chassis as well. So all of that is spreading that load, that twisting force, over this entire section of the chassis. It's not just focusing it onto one plate here. I think I'll end up with these bolts going this way so that they'll protrude, and then the steering box will go on and the nuts go on here. I think that's a better way round because it's very tight, especially underneath here and this one as well. Next job then is to get all this cleaned up and prepped for welding. So I'll take the loose parts off and we'll get those in the blasting cabinet. And I'm going to have to attack the chassis with a grinder. Oh well. I don't know if it shows well on camera, but when I'm grinding I can see white bits, which is the zinc, and then silver bits underneath, which is the steel, so I know how far to go. Also the zinc doesn't spark when you grind it, but obviously steel does. Now, I haven't spent ages taking zinc off. I'm going to put some on the back here, where it's going to go onto the chassis. Put a load of this stuff, Zinga, which is cold galv treatment. It's almost entirely zinc in suspension, it's not even paint. It works really well, but it does need decent surface preparation, hence the shot blasting. Incidentally, I have seen a few of these conversions where people have made a big hole in the middle of this plate to give you extra welding surface. But with the setup that I'm going for, I don't think that's needed. And stay away from the edges. Okay, they're on. Now, it took some doing. It wasn't much fun, to be honest. Just the slightest bit of contamination with arc welding, and it's... yeah, you just... This one here, even the positional welding, this one here I had to grind back and go over again. So I ended up doing a bead that burned out any remnants of zinc or paint or whatever, clean that back, and then did a proper bead, as it were. Anyway, that's on. This one here is the one I'm least happy with. I had to build it up for strength, cut it right back, do it again, and then finally a run down. It's not going to get any better. It's not going to get any stronger. It could get tidier, but it's not going to get any stronger than it is. Those are on. And here's a view from underneath. There's the big front plate. Here's the rear plate, and that's where the relay used to be. Here we've got 4 bits of 25mm box section that I've just put through the blaster, and I've cut these to fit snugly in here. And I'm going to weld these to the chassis as well. When I first started thinking about doing this conversion, my initial idea was to just copy the kit that was available from Steve Parker Land Rovers. It's not available anymore because they've gone out of business. Their kit was essentially just a 6mm plate like this, but had then gussets going down there, just like triangles of metal, top and bottom, 4 of them. This is better. Does it need to be better than that kit? I've no idea. I'm not an engineer. If I was an engineer, I'd be able to do some sums and work it out. But it seems to me that if you can make a stronger design for not much more effort, then why not? And here we are. So before I top coat this, got a little bit more to do, metalwork wise. Just got to make a scallop here somewhere. So that's it. That's where that's going to sit in its final position. And there's clearance there now. I'm going to tackle the steering column next. That's not terrible like that. I would prefer it to go that much that way. Quite a different thing. It's so much smaller, this steering wheel. That's what's weird about it. But it does give me a lot of space underneath it. So up here, the bulkhead mounting is exactly the same as before. And then down here, I've got to make something up. So I have seen people have this part of it, the end of the defender column, attached here between the pedal boxes, but that would put, for me, that would put the steering wheel way too far into the cab. So I'm going to put it here. And of course, there's no reason you can't This is normally flat. There's no reason it can't be vertical. Got a piece of 100 by 8 here to use to make up the bracket. So after a load more trial and error, which basically me sitting in there pretending to be on a drive, I brought it forward a bit. So it's come forward about that far from when I made this bracket, and I've put a 10mm spacer to bring it this way. This now is in the perfect position in terms of that dimension, and I think it's in the perfect position in terms of this dimension. My only hesitancy is that I'm going to have to shorten this. So this linkage that came from, this is P38 linkage, same as the box. That's going to attach to the Defender column, but this spline here now, well, this part is wrong. So for my intended driving position to work out, I need to reduce this component by about 54mm. And I think I can do it by sliding it along here. I think, I'm not sure, but I think this whole setup here is designed so that this collapses in the event of a crash. That's of no use to me because Kermit doesn't have crumple zones as such. So if I dismantle this, move this part along a bit and then replace these strange fixings with something more standard, I think we'll be on our way. So this is one of those anti-tamper screws, which I'm going to tamper with. This is probably thread locked is what I'm thinking. Yeah, so let's throw some heat at it. We've got a rubber donut in there that I don't want to heat up, obviously, or any of this actually, but we shouldn't need much heat, just enough to break the thread lock. And now, I'm hoping I can just unwind it. That's why it's not coming out. I'm going to drill into this rivet here without touching the aluminium. The silver lining, of course, is that being a rivet, it's going to be relatively soft. So that hole now I'm going to open up a bit more. Good, we're through what it was and that thing there. Yeah, got there. Okay, over to the truck. I measure it to there, and there's that. As you can see, we've got plenty of clearance without having to do anything to this bulkhead bracket, which is nice. So that's all going to go together really nicely. I'm happy with that now. Next up, I'm going to pull it apart and get this bracket drilled and welded up. Actually, then I can go ahead and blast this, zinger it. And that's ready for a top coat. This is ready for top coat under here. So is that. It's all coming together. Where I'm going to put the spacer on the bracket covers up one of the holes here. So I've countersunk it and I'll weld this screw in there. The spacer goes over that, and then the steering column bolts through there and into that one. So we've got to get this back together. This side is easy. That's already tapped for an M8. This one though, that would take an M8, but there's no room on the back here for a nut. So I think the solution is a thread insert. So now we've got two tapped M8s. It's a kit I hardly ever use, but one of those when it's handy, it's very handy. I'm going to put some thread lock on as well. Most of the system I'm going to put nylocks on. Obviously you can't hear it. It's time for some top coating. So I'm using a water-based paint over the Zinger because solvent paints soften it. This is mainly just for looks, to blend it in with the rest of the chassis. Next up is to sort out the Draglink. This is the existing Draglink down here. Now this attached to the steering relay, which was under here, so it's going to be way too short for attaching to the steering box, which is going to end up with its arm about there-ish. So my plan is to get hold of one of these, which is the track rod, get a spare one of these and cut it down to the right length. So I'll have to cut it down and then tap the end to receive one of these ball joints. I'm pretty sure I've got at least one spare track rod. Let's go and have a look. They look like track rods, but it's some Draglink. That's the longitudinal link. There's one. Track rod. But it's nice and straight at least. That's the main thing. The fact this is so manky doesn't really matter because we're going to replace the ends, cut it down, retap it. Yeah, we're going to completely rebuild it anyhow. I'm not going to bother trying to unscrew anything here. I'm going to chuck this straight in the forge, get it all hot, and then it'll undo relatively easily, I suspect. Should do. We'll let that cool down. In the meantime, I can knock out this joint here. I should be able to use all these fittings off this Draglink on the, I was going to say on the new Draglink that we're going to make up. One end is reverse thread, the other is normal thread. I've got a normal thread tap. So what that means in practice is I've got to keep this end as is. So now to make this track rod into a Draglink for the new setup, I need to know where to cut it and then I can tap it and we'll fit the other one of those. So in order to know the length that we're going to have to cut it down to, I'm going to have to refit the steering box, which I can do because that's dry now. And then what I've discovered about the Range Rover steering box is that, if I can get it in the light there, there's an indicator here, and when it matches there, that's straight ahead. That's the straight ahead position. With that on there, that's the straight ahead position, even though it's kinked off to the side. To double check that, we'll go lock to lock and establish the centre position that way, which means putting the rest of this together, which that can go together and stay together now, I think. Yes, I think we're at that point. Time for the new bracket. M10's a total overkill, but they just roughly match the bolts that were holding the steering box. So that's why they're there. I put nylocks on everything. Put this back in as well. That's in. Got to notch a tiny bit out of this bracket for the head of this bolt to clear. Of course, I test fitted this without the pinch bolt. Good. Now I can work out the lock to lock difference. It's going to be more than lock to lock, isn't it? It's going to be as far as the box goes, rather. So from there, half, 1, half, 2, half, 3, half, 1/4, 1, 1.5, and a bit. Yeah. So that is the midpoint. That indicated that I was on about there now. All I need to do now is make these ones dead ahead. So as near as damn it, that's that. Yep. There's going to be plenty of adjustment in the track rod, so this doesn't have to be terribly accurate at this point. Next job is to drill that out with a 16mm drill. I'm going to put the taper tap in to begin with. This is just to get everything square. Start it. Let's switch to the device. Second tap should be much easier, because we've cut a thread, now we're just refining it. So that's just so the clamp can squeeze up on the thread. Moment of truth, will it thread? I hope so. Yeah. Fairly open design, so I'm being quite generous with the copper grease here, because we're going to need to adjust these a fair bit. Okay, that's that. Right, that's all up together and it's looking really good. I'm really happy with that actually. There's plenty of clearance on everything where there needs to be. And most importantly, all the play's gone from the system. That's just really nice. Here in the cab, I've put the dashboard back together, tidied it up a bit. And again, with all the steering together, it just feels so different. When you move the steering wheel now, you can feel you can feel it's attached to things, and things immediately happen without a delay. Previously, it was about that far. I could move it that far before you felt anything properly engaged in the steering box. I'm staring at an MG logo, which I might have to do something about. If it was just an M, that'd be all right. Maybe I'll do that. So I chopped about 3 inches off of this brake pipe, reflared the end and reinstated it. That was simple enough. Remember this before it came round and in that way. But when I put this together, I was just looking at this and don't like it. The flexi pipe is all right, but the flexi pipe goes around to this bracket and then into a small hard line. This is as the Defender. This is the bit I'm unhappy with. See here? So if we go to full lock, you can see that the hard line there is perilously close to that shock absorber, which I think we can do better. So rather than the flexible pipe coming to this bracket, what I want is a flexible pipe going all the way to the caliper, so from the caliper up to the chassis here. I did some searching online and I found a website where you can design your own custom hoses. Super easy to use. You just pick a fitting for one end, pick the length, pick the fitting for the other end, bosh, it's done. And Tracy's just turned up with it. And this was about 20 hours after ordering, which is extraordinary. And it's exactly what I ordered as well. These things shouldn't be amazing, but they are. So I'm going to give a shout out to this company, Custom Hoses. Not sponsored, not affiliated. I paid full price for this, all that. Just really good service. So credit where it's due. At the moment, there's something like this going into the caliper with copper pipework, kind of the pipe coming straight off of that. What I've chosen to do instead is to use a banjo fitting. I think this will give us better clearance up to that shock absorber. Here's the bracket from the old setup, and I'm thinking we can reuse that and attach this on that side of it, and then we head up to there. Oh, that's great. That flexi pipe doesn't touch anything now. Let's go full lock. Yeah, that's good. I'm going to repeat the process on the other side and then bleed the system. Yeah, and we're not touching there. Good. Next up, I'm going to reinstate the wing, which will mean cutting out a big section somewhere about like that to allow for all of this. I need to fabricate a cover here to come over the box, but that wasn't a bad guess. Under this cover is Kermit's spare engine, which I'm going to rebuild one day. I haven't stripped it down yet, so there should be a hydraulic pump on it we can use. So I'm going to take the hydraulic pump and its bracketry and put that on Kermit's engine, which means changing the alternator. But it means changing the alternator for a better one, I think. If I can find the alternator that used to live here, which I think is somewhere in the stores, that's a higher output than the one that's currently on Kermit. And I've never been quite happy with the mounting that I made up for the one that's on Kermit. Magneti Morelli, made in UK. That is a make that was fitted to the 200 Ti. Oh, yeah. I think we've got a winner. Look at this. It's a good job I've got a spare bracket, because that's 2 sheared off studs in there now. I'll probably reuse this reservoir as well. So we'll fit this and then the pump. That's that. There we go, that's the bracket installed. Now for the pump mounted. I'm going to leave it loose for now because we've got to do that to adjust it. That's the pump is now in, so's the alternator. I've got a wire in the alternator, well I've got the plumb in the pump. So I think this is an original belt. Let's see if it fits. That. Next job is to find somewhere to put the little reservoir. This one came off the engine, this one came with the P38 kit. They're almost the same, just slightly different mountings. I think this one is going to be a little bit easier to use. And I'm going to try and put it here. I'll take that and just open it out. Just like that. This will be there. Okay, good. That will go there. I'll leave that undone for now because I've got to get another hose on the bottom of this, which is the return from the steering box. But talking of which, that's what's up next is the pipework. So the last big challenge is to sort out the plumbing, to sort out the pipework between the pump, the steering box and that reservoir. I've discovered something that I haven't seen in any of the other conversions that I've read about, and that is that the P38 feed pipe actually fits onto the 200 TDI pump. It's not a straightforward fit though, because the actual pipework itself is all routed to go around a Range Rover, not around this thing. But maybe we can make it work. The other one, the other line, this was sheared off in the kit of parts that I got, so I'm going to have to do something with that anyway. I'm going to attach this onto the steering box and then use a compression fitting to attach it to this one to go to that reservoir. Here we are under the truck. This is the power steering pump here. This is the hose that comes from the reservoir, and this here is the high pressure pipe. And this is the P38 high pressure pipe, unmodified currently, and this actually looks okay, this bit. I'll show you the other end. This is the other end of it. This is the steering box, and this looks great too. I've sent it down the hole here where the steering relay used to be. Apparently this is where it falls apart, so it comes down out the steering relay hole over here, up there and then over there. If I could put a bend in here where it comes through the steering relay and bend it out this way, we might actually be able to get it to fit without any further modification. First thing I want to do though is ease this a bit. It's a bit tight here. What I'd like to do is to open up this bend and bring this bit upwards. Then the flexi part here would drop down the relay hole a lot easier. So let's try that. I hate groveling under vehicles. Look at the state of me. What I need is a car lift. Nearly. Nearly got one. Let's see what we can do here. I need a little bit of a twist that way. Just a smidge. Bend. So if I could. So I think that's all I need there. This pipe bending set is really for copper pipe, but I think we'll manage. That is perfect. Fits. It's going to fit. The return from the steering box back to the reservoir is a lot more straightforward. So I've discovered I can use the 200 TDI pipe, so the one I took off the engine. That will go from the reservoir down across the chassis and up to here, and then I'm going to cut it off there. This is the remnants of what came with the P38 steering box. I'm going to cut this one here and then join the two hard lines together with a compression fitting. Here we've got the steel component of the high pressure line and then the return line there. Now if I clamp them in place, they're going to sit really nicely against the front cross member here. Here's the plan. I'm going to drill a hole in the chassis, daub on a bit of Zinger, install a riv nut, and then one of these each side of the cross member. I've tidied up the engine bay, I've tidied up the cab, I've bled the brakes, and I think we're approaching the home straight. The last big unknown is what to do in here. Got this mud shield to go back in, which will just go back as it came out, just there. But here, remember we cut this section out to allow for, well, for all the steering gear. So I need to not just cover this up, but do something to replace the structure. I think this is actually an offcut from what I used to make the rear door of Kermit. This will bolt on the inner wing and provide all the strength that we need, and then it's just a case of finding a piece of aluminium and cutting and folding it a tad so it comes off of there and comes down to make the shield. There's a nice wibbly bit, it's not going to be used for anything else. Here we go, so I'm going to cut the sheet of alley to 15 by 31 inches and then a whole load of cut and folding and see what's what. I put some riv nuts in here, in the angle. That's going to ring up there. That bolts through here with an M8. and then I'm going to put some more bolts there into the inner wing. I have tweaked the end slightly here. Good. The last thing to do here is to check it for clearance, so I need to put a wheel on and make sure I'm not rubbing anything. Right, let's do that now. I remember Kermit's got wheel spacers, so the wheels do sit a bit further out than they would on a normal series. Let's do that way first. That's the housing I've just made, and you can see on full lock there's plenty of clearance. Bags of room. Excellent. Post is turned up with this, and this should be the last piece of the puzzle. This looks like a normal plumbing connector. I did consider using one of those, but I don't know what they're rated to. But this is a 10L hydraulic fitting, and it's rated to 300 bar, which is at least 3 times what the pump can manage. Here's the pipe we just made up. Oh, it's got to be encouraged down there. I think it goes over. I'll leave the expansion tank off just for a moment so I can check for leaks down here. Yeah, I think we're ready to fire it up. We'll fire up the engine and then see if the system works and bleed all the air out of it. No leaks on the power steering, that's good. That was one hand on the steering wheel, no problems at all. Right, test drive. It's only been a few minutes, but first impressions are very favourable. I drive like this anyway, but it's now much easier. It's self-centering really nicely, which is good. So that suggests I've got the steering set up pretty good.
Amazing.
You're a lot less swervy than last time. Does it feel more under control? First impressions then are entirely positive. Now this is back on the road, we can take a long overdue trip to go and see my mum on the other side of the country. This is going to involve quite a bit of motorway driving. and it'll be a brilliant chance to test the high-speed stability of the new steering system, which, remember, was one of my main motivations for getting this conversion done. See you in a minute. Right then, you join us on the M4. We're going about 56, 57 miles per hour, and I'll give you my impressions of driving at motorway speeds. The first thing I noticed, there is some feedback through the steering wheel. So possibly I need to fit a steering damper. I wanted to try it without a steering damper just to see what it was like. Other than that, it's so easy to drive. It's just like driving a car. That's the biggest difference. And I like driving trucks, but over a long distance I can see this is going to be much easier to get on with. There's no constantly doing that to keep a straight line. It just sits here. It does pull very slightly to the left, so I'm going to have to tweak the Draglink. But remember, I just guesstimated it to get us going, so I got to tweak that slightly. Overall, it's such an easier driving experience, and that's what matters when you're doing it hour upon hour. So for a first try of the new steering system, I'm very happy so far. It's doing exactly as intended. Right, we'll complete our journey, and I'll see you back home. Back home again after that trip to my mum's, and I'm happy to say there's almost nothing to report. On the way up there, that belt that I found in the back of the shed, that started squealing, so I had to tighten that up. While we're away, these new belts turned up, so I can take care of that. Other than that, completely uneventful, as you'd hope. Coming back, on the journey back, I did take it up to 70 miles an hour for a while, just to see what it was like, and the steering was completely the same as it was at 55, 60, my normal pace. I don't like staying at 70 just because of the increased fuel consumption, but it can do it, and it's completely stable at that speed, which was lovely. So there we are, a successful project. I've achieved everything I set out to do with this. At low speeds it's dramatically improved, at high speeds it's tremendously improved. I've been trying to think of any kind of downside to this conversion, and all I can come up with is I have lost some points for originality. So what makes Kermit Kermit in the eyes of the DVLA, for those of you abroad, that's the English registration system, you've got to have a certain number of parts of the original vehicle for it to count as the original vehicle. And of course, things like rebuilding the original chassis, keeping it on leaf springs, keeping the original transmission, so on and so forth. This is actually, despite how it might appear, it's actually a very original vehicle. But I've lost some of that now because I've changed the steering system. I've not just changed, like, say, the steering box like for like, I've changed the system. So I have lost some points on that. But I had points to lose, so I'm not bothered. Overall, I'm absolutely delighted with this conversion. And it's on to the next project, which is in here, finishing off the car lift. And then I can put this on the car ramp and check underneath it, make sure everything's hunky-dory before the next big adventure. I'll see you for that. Cheers for now.